everyone, welcome to today's deep dive video. We're going to talk about forward folds. Forward folds are super common in pretty much every single yoga class, unless you're taking a restorative class, maybe. Yeah, with the exception of maybe a restorative class, I think you're going to end up doing a forward fold in some way in most yoga classes. You can even do forward folds sitting in a chair and doing chair yoga. So they're pretty ubiquitous. So we're going to talk about how we can make sure that we are hinging from our hips and we are putting the stress in the right place. A lot of times when people do forward folds, they dump a lot of the weight into their back, especially in their lower back, in order to get in order to keep their legs straight. So to keep their legs straight, because their hamstrings are tight, they're kind of rounding their back, and then it's like, oh, why is this uncomfortable? You know, why does my back hurt? Well, it could be because you have tight hamstrings and you are dumping all of the weight into your upper back instead of your hips, where it belongs. Our hips are a hinge, and we are able to do this, it's what our hips are meant to do. So some tips for that is to think about hinging from your hips. So you can put your hands on your hips and just think about hinging, keeping your back straight, hinging from your hips. Now you might need to bend your knees a little bit. If you lock them out, that's going to make bending a little bit hard. But just kind of like keep your knees like nice and loose. And just as you bend forward, you might need to bend your knees a little bit depending on the tightness of your hamstrings, and just think about bending from your hips. So just give this a try just to see how it feels. Keeping your knees bent a little bit, keeping your spine neutral. Yeah, awesome. Another thing to think about is the lifting from the hips when we actually get down into our forward fold. So we have like what I usually call the under butt. So it's where your leg meets your butt. In my Yoga for All training, Diane Bondi calls that the gluteal fold. I like to call it the under butt because I am mature. And so I always like to think about lifting from that area. So keeping that spot in your body in mind, think about lifting from that area. That might require you to bend your knees a little bit. Forward folds are a pretty intense hamstring stretch. We don't think of them as hamstring stretches because a lot of times when we bend over, we just kind of like bend over like this. And we don't really think about, you know, how it affects our hamstrings. But it's a pretty intense hamstring stretch. So if your hamstrings are tight, you're going to feel it, and you're going to need to bend your knees. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I personally have pretty flexible hamstrings, so I don't need to bend my knees as much as maybe another person. But I've got really tight shoulders, so it all kind of balances out. So we'll think about our bending from the hips, right? Another thing you can do is keeping your feet wherever they feel comfortable. So you might be cued in a class hips with distance, which is really vague, and it doesn't really tell you very much because all of our hips are different. If you look at like just the skeleton of like different people's hips, like they're all different. So another cue that's a little bit better of a visual is you can do 2 fist width distance because our hips are really not that big, but they're all different sizes. So this is about, but if that doesn't work for you, keep your feet wider, especially if you're like me and you've got a lot of stomach. You might want to keep your feet a little wider, or if you're pregnant, so you have a belly, you've got a pregnant belly, you might want to keep your feet wider. And that's okay. Keep your feet wherever you feel like you have a decent amount of stability. Stability is important so you don't fall over. So bringing your feet wherever they feel comfortable. Now, keeping your hands on your hips, think about hinging forward, unlocking your knees, right? And now we're going to come down. All right, and I'm bringing my hands to my blocks here, okay? You're going to think about lifting from this part of your body, and then you may feel that stretch all in here. So you're lifting from your hips are coming up So you're lifting from your hips, which is bringing your head down to the floor. What we often do in yoga, because we want to attain a certain look of a pose, we start to bring our head forward. And now if I do this without lifting from my hips, I feel all of that in my back. But if I lift from my hips, which allows my head to move forward, I don't feel it in my back. And usually when I do get into a forward fold, I have a nice cracking of my spine, and I'm not gonna lie, it does feel really nice. Some people don't like when their joints crack. I like it, so it feels really good. Another way that you can think about this, if the whole idea of lifting through the hips is it's just not clicking, which is fine, especially on a video. I've got a little sliver of wall here, so I'm gonna use. So get yourself next to a wall. Doesn't have to be a lot, and you can bring your feet kind of as close as they go. So I'm gonna keep mine. You might need to adjust as you come down. So think again. You're gonna come down, right? And now your butt is gonna hit the wall. That part of your under butt is gonna hit the wall. And now start to walk your feet. You can bring your blocks with you. You can bring a chair. You can do this with a chair. So now my under butt is touching the wall. And now I've got a really intense stretch throughout my hamstrings right here. So I can bend my knees, and still lift my hips. Bend and lift. Yeah. Slowly come out of that. So those are some tips for keeping. You can use blocks. This is where I usually see some students where they're kind of just hanging there, and like a nice hanging stretch can feel really, really great. But if we're just kind of spending time there, lifting the floor up a little bit by using blocks or bolster is really, really great. Something to think about is just kind of listening to your body. If you're feeling it in your back, then try to focus more of the movement into your hips. Where I have found this to be especially beneficial is in the garden. So I don't know if you guys have been gardening, if you're gardeners or you spent a lot of time just kind of bent over, maybe even picking up toys. I find this a lot when I'm picking up after my 4-year-old, is that if you're kind of just bending over and picking stuff up, eventually your back is gonna hurt. But if we hinge from our hips, keeping our knees bent, and kind of keeping our back straight and our spine straight. So now it's a lot easier to kind of do things down here, coming into a little bit of a squat here, and now I can pick weeds and pick up toys and all that kind of stuff, and I don't get the pain in my back that I used to. Again, it's going to take stretches in the hamstring, so how that looks for you is going to be a little bit different. I happen to have pretty flexible hamstrings to make up for my very unflexible shoulders. So just kind of play with it and see how it feels. If you have more questions, you can always reach out to me. You can find me on Instagram at HikingYogaMama. You can email me at openarmsyoganc@gmail.com. And I have a Facebook page, so you can DM me, whatever. You can find, there are a bunch of ways, and we can chat and hopefully figure out a way to make forward folds a little bit more accessible. And that's it. So thanks for joining me, guys.